الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم مصطفى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المظلومين المعصومين وأصحابه المنتجبين أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers, respected elders and dear sisters. It's an honor to be here with you. That introduction sets a very high bar. Please ignore that last comment, inshallah. It's an honor to be here. I've heard quite a bit about the Taqwa Lane Center over the years, whether it be through Sister Latifa or some of my contacts on the West Coast who happen to know about the goings-on on the East Coast, or through Brother Hassan, who is also a student at the seminary with us, which who I know some of you know. So it's an honor and blessing to be here, and I hope that tonight our conversation can be somehow useful and be a learning experience for myself as well as everybody here included. So what we're going to do tonight, inshallah, is first we're going to have a very brief couple of words about Imam Ali. As you know, it is his birthday today, the 13th of Rajab. And then thereafter we're actually going to have a group activity. So you don't get to be off the hook and take a nap while you hear somebody speak. But we're actually going to get into groups and try to follow in the footsteps of our Imam through talking about the concept of community building. So I'll explain more about how the community activity, or the group activities will work in a little bit. But first let's talk a little bit about our beloved Imam. So as you know, the Prophet ﷺ, when he began his mission and ended his mission, he had 23 years with his community. So what that means is that when the Prophet came and revolutionized the way that the Arab Peninsula and its inhabitants operated, meaning the way people conceived of religion, the way people conceived of rights and responsibilities, the way that people conceived of each other as members of a community was revolutionized when the Prophet ﷺ entered into their lives after he announced his prophethood. So after such a revolution, such a change in one's identity from being primarily a member of a particular tribe to the death, right? To being part of a more holistic ideal, a member of an idealistic community, one which spans tribes. Being part of a community which saw women simply as objects, and now being part of a new community which said, no, women have just as much possibility of entering the highest realms of heaven as men do. Being part of a community which saw its enslaved members as people without any rights whatsoever, to one which says we must free our slave. To have 23 years to ingrain those new ideals and ethics into a community is really just a blip on the map. So the Prophet ﷺ decided and was told by God to appoint your son-in-law, Imam Ali, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salam, as the protector and the nourisher of the community after my passing. In other words, the Prophet changed the way the Arabian Peninsula operated and said we don't have an Arabian view anymore, we have a universal view. We don't have a view toward our tribe, but we have a view to teaching the mercy of God to the rest of the world. And so he offered this small community, many of the members of whom only saw the Prophet for a few moments of their life. Some of whom would become Muslim in the outside of the city of Medina and Mecca, had not even met the Prophet. How can you expect that these people would really have ingrained in their hearts the ideals of Islam? You wouldn't. You must have a successor thereafter to continue to nourish this project, which is in its infancy stage, right? So then, as you all know the story, I'm not saying anything new here. After the death of the Prophet, ﷺ, Imam Ali does not have his due. Imam Ali is supposed to be put in the position of nurturing and building the community, and then people take away that space for him. Okay? And so you can imagine three primary responses that you might expect from somebody in such a situation. The first is that you would expect that they would just leave. Why didn't Imam Ali just leave? He was talked up by the Prophet day in and day out in front of this community. He has put in several positions of leadership during the Prophet's life. He is the leading warrior of the Muslim army. And then when it all comes down to it, when the Prophet is gone, the community gives him none of the respect that he is supposed to be given. So why not just leave? I think that's what most of us would do. We're part of a group. We're a main core part of a particular group. We sacrifice in the way of that group or that institution or that movement. And then at some point there's a change in that group's dynamic. We expect that we're supposed to play another major part, and then we're pushed off to the side. Most of us would just leave. But Imam Ali didn't. The second possibility is that Imam Ali would wage a war against the people who took his rights. But Imam Ali did not do that. Not because on principle it would have been a problem, but because the circumstances weren't right for an uprising to occur. Again, we said that the community that the Prophet built is in its infancy stages. Any sort of dissension, any sort of fitna, any sort of argumentation, especially any sort of use of force to change the way the community was moving, is going to break that community apart. So the Imam did say, if at least 40 men come to my door with shaved heads and swords brandished, we can lead a revolution and change the way the community dynamic is supposed to work. But people didn't do it. So that the Imam saw that there was a higher goal, there was a higher ideal, there was a maslaha in maintaining unity of the community, so he put his sword away. And so instead, what the Imam does is he says, you know what? My purpose as Imam, part of my purpose was to continue to build this new nascent community that the Prophet had built for 23 years of his life. He himself, the Imam himself, had struggled over that period to develop this community. So when we look at the Imam, sometimes we only look at him through the lens of the person through which we are granted heaven, or we look at him as the warrior Imam, or we look at him as the statesman Imam. But sometimes we can identify more closely with him if we look at him through the lens of experiences that we all have. So tonight we'll look at him through the lens of the community builder Imam. The Imam as community builder. So what does the Imam do? He says, okay, these fellows here, they took what is my due. They went against the clear dictates of the Prophet, which was to put me in a position of power to continue to lead this new community. But I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to huff and puff out of the area. I'm not going to go into self-imposed exile because my feelings are hurt. I'm not going to wage war just to get my rights. There is a higher ideal in preserving the unity of this community, and myself as the Imam, I can push my own agenda as community builder. Maybe not as Imam, maybe not as Khalifa, but as an advisor to the rulers, as a person with wisdom which everybody recognizes, and as still a respected member, a senior member of the prophetic community. I can say, when I see something going wrong in the community, I can give my advice, and people would generally follow it. And so, what we want to do tonight, instead of what we often do, and continue to recite the fada'il and the virtues, of the Imam, which are innumerable. Instead of doing that, what we want to do is try to walk in his footsteps. Because as Muslims in America, we are in that infancy stage. Right? We are in that early period where our community as a whole, if we think of Muslims in America, not just Shi'i Muslims, even if we look at Muslims as a whole in America, not as Indian Muslims or black Muslims or white Muslims or Iranian Muslims, but as Muslims as a whole, that whole project doesn't really know where it's going. And so when you walk into different masajids, when you walk into different community centers, you see all sorts of ideas about where our community or where our particular local center needs to move in. Okay? So what we want to do tonight is, as a community, and I know I'm an outsider, but as a community member in terms of the larger American society, we want to try to learn from each other and try to have a conversation about if we were in the shoes of Imam Ali, what would we say our community needs, both locally, in particular tonight, but also thinking more broadly for the national community. So, what we're going to do, inshallah, is we have 7 prompts. And so we're going to break into 7 groups. Okay? And I need there to be 7 people, a person in each of these groups that has a phone with data, because you're going to have to access your prompts online. And we're going to take 20 minutes to talk about each group's prompt. Right? So group number 1 is going to have prompt number 1. You're going to have a small blurb, and then you're going to have 2 main questions for each prompt. First question is going to be analyze your particular community's ability to meet the goals in the prompt. Right? So first, actually list what you think that prompt is getting at. So it's not going to be as simple as congregational prayer. That's too simple. But it'll be something like spiritual development. So list what things does a community do to develop the spirit. How does your community, what does your community do to that end? How does your community achieve that goal? And 3, in a constructive manner, your group needs to have 3 proposals of things that you think the community can actually feasibly do toward that goal. And inshallah, these proposals will be as a jumping board for the strengthening of every community that every member of this group has. Just a couple of quick thoughts. I thought those are all excellent points. And I think what was really interesting, because I listened to this group in particular, was moving from what often gets stuck in, usually talking about spirituality, gets stuck in prayers. And so I really liked that the group moved from prayers into the manifestation of one's prayers into one's character and movement outside in the world. A couple of quick, more kind of mundane ideas from my side, just to improve upon. It seems like the Senate does have dua and it does have salat and all of that. 2 quick points would be, I often think about, I used to live on a cul-de-sac, and when I lived on a cul-de-sac, we had pretty frequent interaction with our neighbors. We weren't super duper close with our neighbors, but you see them every day after work, say hello, that kind of thing. Most of us don't live in Muslim neighborhoods or don't live with Muslim neighbors. And so establishing prayer, even if just several times a week in congregation, can be seen as a social activity as well, in that after prayer, not only do you say salam, you just check in on everybody. How are you doing? How are you emotionally doing? How are you financially doing? All of that. So prayer can be kind of a springboard for kind of deepening the most basic elements of your social activities. And then the last thing is, Imam Hassan said that he would watch his mother, Sayyidah Fatima, on your point. Every night she would pray, and she would pray for 40 neighbors by name before she ever prayed for herself. And Imam Hassan always thought that, as a child, said he was relating this, he used to see his mother do this. He said it was strange to me, and she told me it's always the neighbor first. In our context, perhaps the neighbor first is also there, but it's our community members first. So praying for each other in dua by name, maybe make a list of your community members and pray for them by name several times a week. And that, I think, softens the heart toward people. We may have disagreements with each other in community life, or we may have a little spat here and there. But if you're regularly praying for even the people you have some disagreements with by name, it's hard to hold they say hold a grudge like a microphone. It's hard to keep that grudge held. So
my theme was social development and service, and so we just had to name some existing service projects that are in the community. I'm from Chicago, so I can't speak to the Maryland or Virginia community, but Alia and I and Sister Latifah were discussing conceptually how to think of it, which was first this is on the level of 3 service projects. So the first would be correct me if I'm wrong, but to serve the community here internally. So that may be during an event like this to help clean afterwards, to help vacuum, to be responsible for locking or opening the doors, for coming early or leaving later, even if it's just cleaning or backyard work. So I think that applies to anywhere you are. And then before moving on to serving, sometimes I think maybe people think that before you have to serve your internal community, and then you can immediately jump out and serve your external. But before doing that, having a brief checkup period where it's not even brief, but always consistently making sure that the community that you live in is stable and nourished. So having a service project around that, so that maybe even before having a food pantry for the external community, having one for the internal community, making sure that they're stable. And then you can go on to having your larger service project for the Muslim and non-Muslim community.
So my group, our theme was religious education, and we were told to first find 3 areas where we thought education could be better, or 3 things that we thought, could be improved in the education community. So the first one was consistency, and we thought one of the members saw the consistency in her community, which turned out to be the Manassas community, not here, was lacking because there wasn't wasn't consistent quality of programming. So there'd be a program, but the content of the program would be something that she wasn't interested in, or she didn't think was worth going. So she thought consistency in that, and yeah, that was one. And then another issue that we came up with was that there's a disconnect between the youth and communities and Islam itself and the adults in the community. And then our third issue was disconnect between the speakers of communities and the people that they're speaking to, the audience. The speeches are hard to follow for some people. They are too slow for other people, not engaging enough. So we came up with 3 programs to remedy those issues that we discussed. The first one for the consistency issue was a book club of sorts. It was taking an Islamic book, could be any book, and assigning a chapter to read every so often, a week, a month, and then everyone coming together and discussing. And we thought that was good because even if the leader wasn't there, then the people could discuss and talk to each other among peers because everyone had the same material and everyone had access to the same information. The second program for the disconnect between the youth and Islam, or the community, was a youth program based around experiences that Muslim youth have every day, and ways to deal with those experiences, whether it's intolerance or how to tolerate other ideas that you're opposed to, or anything, and going around giving scenarios and having the youth brainstorm ideas on how to deal with those scenarios, and then giving the Islamic perspective on how to deal with those scenarios. And our third idea for the disconnect between the speaker and the audience was to have a flipped lecture, which is basically everyone is given a lecture or a, I don't know, piece of writing to read that's like no longer than 20 minutes or listen to. And then, they take it home and they listen to it and they take notes and they, reflect and stuff. And then they come back and they have a discussion and what with the speaker or the writer of that thing there. And then afterward, the people are able to give feedback to the speaker about how, how their speech could have helped them understand it better, or I don't know what pitfalls they were and how to improve those. And also they get a chance to talk about the lecture itself.
Excellent. I think that addresses quite a bit of what I had in mind here, and I think that was nice because it was very pinpointed. Just a couple other quick thoughts. Imam Zain al-Abidin wrote Sahifa, the book of du'as that he has, primarily, or perhaps primarily, as an educational tool. But I noticed in a lot of our communities we kind of speed read those du'as in Arabic, and we often don't understand Arabic, and it makes me question, if the Imam meant this as an educational tool, what are we doing with it? So for Sahifa in particular, there is a decent English translation by William Chittick. So one idea I had was, kind of connects to the spiritual development idea as well, is to read and analyze some of the du'as in English. It may not be as precise as reading the Arabic if you were an Arab who knew classical Arabic, but that's not where most people are, even Arabs themselves. So analyzing texts in the language that we all understand, that's how we learn. Excellent. So a couple of thoughts from my end. Those are all very good. I really like the idea of raising crops. I tried to do this program last summer. My efforts were thwarted, but in our youth community we do have a small chicken coop of 9 chickens. Right now we're breaking even by selling the eggs and then buying the feed after that. But we haven't found a way to, you can't really monetize it quite yet, but I think those ideas are good. And especially if, for instance, if you can have a youth program that teaches youth how to engage with the earth again, which I think is something we're all failing in, quite honestly. And then if we can monetize the crops or use them towards some of the service projects, or just use them for the dinners that the programs have. I think that's an interesting way to think about a center's economy. The other thing that, kind of bouncing off of your book club idea, one of the things that Brother Hassan, another student with me, mentioned is, how many of us didn't know how a credit score worked, or what a credit score does for you, and then in our young, late teens, early 20s, mess up our credit, have a hard time making major purchases in the future. So having like youth econ 101 type classes within the mosque, I think can be something that prevents kind of economic sinks for our communities into the future. If our young people have a sense of how to budget, I wish I had a sense of how to budget early in my life. That means everybody has a little bit more potential to be with their head above water as they get older, and then hopefully that can translate into financial success or stability, if not independence, for the community itself. And then also, this is kind of a larger project, but redefining economic success for ourselves as Muslims. Our society teaches us, get more, get as much as you can, and then, die on that bed of cash. But for Muslims, maybe those priorities are a little bit different, right? You have charitable priorities that should be part of your day-to-day life. Maybe you don't take that job that's going to burn you out 80 hours a week. You take something that, you take a pay cut, but you have a more balanced life where you actually can be involved in benefiting your center and raising your children, and even as a man, right? So sometimes we think we have to take those burnout jobs to make as much cash as we can, instead of changing our priorities about what will make us happy, or how many material benefits we actually need in our life, so that we can have a more balanced life with our family and our community. One of the biggest things that I've seen in communities is that the people who are in the mosques the most often look the most tired, because for some reason the people who attend the most, or who are on boards, for instance, they tend to have a strong drive to leadership, and I think that translates in their work lives as well. But that means that these people are burning out quicker. So if you have a bunch of tired board members or a bunch of tired volunteers, things start to look a little dreary. So I think redefining success economically for ourselves as individuals. Thank you all. I think I learned a lot from this exercise. Hopefully everybody learned something from everybody else. The final thing is just a reminder for kind of putting this all into perspective, is that the message of Islam is relatively simple. Right? We have an origin. We've been birthed from God, by God, into the world through our mothers. And then we're on a journey back to God. Right? We have an origin, and we're heading back to Him through a return to Him on Yom Qiyamah. And the whole point of that journey is not to return to Him bumped and bruised, or return to Him as kind of spiritual amputees, but instead to return to Him more holy, and more whole, and more righteous. So when we think about our communities, communal experiences and community spaces and communal organizations are things that help us all on that ascent back to God. Right? They should help us all become more righteous. And so that can be a basic standard for analyzing and evaluating every communal interaction that you have. Is this making me a better person? Is this going to make my family a group of better people? Right? Is this making my community, this program for instance, a better experience for the community, so that we return back to Allah more whole? And with that, inshallah, thank you very much for your patience and your time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Muhammad.